Hello and welcome to Bhagavatam. Today we're going to cover chapters 10 till 12. It's quite a bit here, but our topic is really interesting and I think you're going to enjoy. It's very topical. It's very much about our present times. So let's get into it. So today we're going to talk about government, systems of government. We've had so many. But we're going to contrast our modern day systems of government with the ancient systems. There was a time, the Vedic time, thousands of years ago, where the earth was ruled not by the kind of monarchs and leaders that we have today, but by Dharma Kings, or saintly kings, as some would say. People who were highly evolved beings and who brought to their subjects, to the citizens, a way of life that was based upon spiritual growth. They were people who were of character. Anyway, let's get into more of what they were like, and I want to show you the contrast today. Then we'll dive into the story that is in the Bhagavatam as well. So in these days, we've seen certain kinds of government. We've seen monarchy, and recently the Queen died, who was Queen of England for over 70 years, and had been their kingdom, their colonial kingdom had spread far and wide. They had been the greatest power once upon a time, and then over time were reduced to literally nothing. But monarchy was a system in which the rulers took the earnings of the peasants and made themselves wealthy. And thereby they thrived. And then there came a time where that was not enough. The peasants weren't giving them enough from their lands. So they decided to go out to other places and plunder them. And then we had colonialism. And then came a rebellion against the monarchy. We saw the French Revolution. We saw the rise of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. And we saw what happened in China as well, the communist revolution that took place. So communism and socialism, in Italy too, we had socialism come up there, and in many parts of the world for that matter. There was a rise against that monarchy, and people wanted a system in which everybody would be equal, everyone would share the wealth, and we would have a fair and just society. But there was a twist to the plot. The whole thing was taken over by dictators. Dictators like Stalin and Hitler came onto the scene, and Mussolini. And the result was there were a few people in power and everybody else was suffering as peasants. And to some degree we have that even today in countries like China, though they've started changing their policies to some extent. And then, of course, we had the grand experiment of democracy in which popularity was the main focus on the choice of a leader. Popularity reigned over competence, and that has led to its own very tragic outcomes. We've seen in some countries, popular leaders, like in the Philippines and even in India and many other countries across the world, Mexico, and to name a few, you've seen the leaders strip the wealth away from the people and pocket it themselves, put it into Swiss bank accounts and what have you, millions and even billions of dollars. In many of these countries, and perhaps even around the world, we've seen tremendous corruption. I mean, they might use fancy words like lobbying or whatever, but it's corruption, let's face it. when you have private interests lobbying, putting money in the pockets of politicians, and those politicians then affecting policy, that's bribery, and that is corruption. But it goes by in very legitimate ways in today's halls of power. And till today, we still have dictators and strongmen who people look up to and admire, but who inevitably lead the country to ruin, as we keep on seeing again and again. In the US here, we have seen an array of popular elected people ranging from movie stars, TV stars, narcissists, philanderers, and sweet talkers. There's been quite the array of leaders that we've seen. So is there a better way? Is there a better way of governance? Is there a better way of leadership? In the Srimad Bhagavatam, we see a better way. and we hear about tremendous leaders. During that Vedic culture, we come across what were called Rajarshi. Raja meaning king, and Rishi meaning a highly evolved being. You could say saint. You could say just very incredibly powerful spiritual people. They were trained in these spiritual values from childhood. It wasn't something that just happened overnight. It was from the Gurukul. They were trained in that by the Guru, and the Guru taught them basic spiritual values first: simplicity, honesty, charity, tolerance, patience, equanimity, respect for the earth, respect for every being, for everyone, for all creatures. They had them practice meditation, and even though they might have been sons of kings, they slept on the ground and they learned how to care for nature. And with that meditation and so on came the training of the mind and the ego. The Guru was not there to flatter their ego because they may be wealthier, they may be the sons of kings. No. They were exactly at the same level as everybody else. They learned humility. And this was the path of Dharma that Krishna came to establish on the earth. This is what had been lost over time. And he had said that I come dharma samsthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge, that I come millennium after millennium to establish the principles of Dharma. So let's move back to our story of the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam, by the way, is not just histories. It is not just stories of great people's lives and highly evolved beings in their lives, but it is also a lot of teachings within that. Sometimes the teachings are direct and philosophical, as you will come across in some time, and sometimes they are through the examples of others. So at this point, we're looking at the examples of the Pandavas. I'll tell you more about them in a minute. So, right. This is now chapter 10, the departure of Krishna for Dharaka. And here, we can see a picture of the Pandavas. This is from a show that was made on the Mahabharata. And there's 5 brothers, the Pandavas. And these Pandavas, if you want to see the spelling of that, you can see it now here. Right, and the oldest of them, his name was Yudhishtira. So he was the one who was now the king after the battle of Kurukshetra. Getting back here. So, and this king Yudhisthira, he was the embodiment of Dharma. That means that of spiritual values, of all the things we talked about till now. And he had become the undisputed king of Bharat. What is Bharat? Bharat is the original name for India. What is now called India was actually a much bigger, larger, vast territory that spread all the way through Afghanistan, Iran, all the way up to Turkey, and all the way and far out into the east as well. Not China, but before that. So that was Bharat. And Bharatvarsh is what this land was called. Name India was later on given by invaders and maybe even the British. I'm not sure who actually gave it that name. So this is Yudhishthira in that show on the Mahabharata. And so during his reign, it is said, the clouds showered all the water that people needed, and the earth produced all the necessities of man in profusion. Due to their cheerful attitude, the cow used to moisten the grazing ground with milk. The rivers, oceans, hills, mountains, forests, creepers, and medicinal drugs in every season paid their tax quota to the king in profusion, meaning even nature wanted to bless the king with giving every kind of all its offerings, right? From fruits and vegetables to plants and creepers, everything prospered. Because of the king having no enemy, the living beings were not at any time disturbed by mental agonies, diseases, or excessive heat or cold. Now, this is a strange idea for us. We think nature just does what it does. Like we've been seeing all kinds of natural catastrophes lately. And we just think nature's doing its thing. Maybe it's because of climate change. We think maybe it's because things are kind of, we've polluted the earth so much and we've done certain things. But that's still a very one-dimensional look at nature. Nature is a living organism. Not only are the entities, the plants, the animals, not only are they living entities, but nature itself is a living, breathing, vital entity. That is why in ancient times they thought of different demigods being in charge of nature, in charge of the wind, in charge of the rain, in charge of various things. But whether or not you believe that, you can see that nature is a very powerful force, and it is reacting to humanity as we have it today. Nature is reacting to our actions, and it's not just the climate, it's in every area, because we've become a huge problem for nature. And so nature is striking back, not just through the environment, not just through climate, but also in every other single way that we can look at it, from diseases and viruses to earthquakes to you name it. But these are not necessarily climate induced, they are also from other aspects. So how we have treated nature has been just awesome, just so pathetic. We have ravaged her resources, decimated her forests, wiped out species, killed billions of innocent creatures, polluted the air and water, created mountains of trash that will take thousands of years to destroy. What kind of humanity is this? We have become a nuisance to the planet. That was my little thing on what's happened with nature. But just really try to think of that. And the same nature, when it is given good governance, a good environment, good people running things, dharma prevails on the planet, then nature also blossoms. Actually, we saw it happen for a little while when COVID was here and all the cars and the airplanes just stopped, and suddenly nature began to come back up again, began to blossom. We saw animals coming out onto the streets. We saw the air clearing up. So many things started to change, just as the human beings started to step away from all of this. Our so-called progress is actually our destruction. It has not been in harmony with nature. All right, coming back to the Bhagavatam. So Krishna stayed on for a few months at Hastinapur. Hastinapur is the current day Delhi area. And he stayed on to pacify his relatives after all the battle had been deadly and millions of people had died in the battle. All the ceremonies had been done for the funeral ceremonies. Bhishma had now died, the grandfather. And now he was getting ready to leave for Dwarka. He had helped everyone, protected everyone, done whatever he could. And people were really, really upset. Oh my gosh. They embraced him and he embraced them. And it is said that many nearly fainted because it was impossible for them to bear separation from him. Ordinary devotees like myself, we cannot stop hearing about Krishna. We long to hear his glories, his pastimes. We experience tears of joy and separation in hearing about him. We've never had the opportunity that these people had, who were seeing him intimately. They were associating with his person. They were seeing him face to face, touching him, conversing with him, sleeping, sitting, and dining with the Supreme Being. Imagine their grief of separation when that Supreme Godhead, that personification of the divine, comes and and shows him and herself to us, and we get the chance of association, and now parts from us. How great must have been their grief. It is said in the Bhagavatam, their hearts were melting for him on the cup of affection. They looked at him without blinking, their eyes flooded with tears, and they felt perplexed. As Krishna was leaving, many types of drums, flutes, and instruments were played to honor his departure. The women of the city were saying, "He is the original person, Purusha Purantano. He existed even before the creation and will exist after everything is annihilated. He creates, maintains, and annihilates the material world and yet remains unaffected." So we see Krishna leaving here. They're fanning him. Someone's holding an umbrella over him. They're all just completely sad to see him go. They were saying, "We are so blessed that he is here with us and has taken birth in this land. The inhabitants of his kingdom, Dwarka, where he is now going, are always seeing the soul of all living beings." Krishna is the soul of the soul. So you have your own soul, right? We are all infinitesimal souls, tiny spiritual sparks. But he is the soul of the soul. He is present at that time in this loving feature, this beautiful form of his. He glances at them and favors them with sweet smiles. Then they went on to say, his wives must have undergone great penances and devotion to constantly relish the nectar from his lips when he kisses them. He rescued them from the demon kings like Bhaumasura and others headed by Shishupal. The Pandavas, accompanied by their armies, went along with Krishna for a considerable distance to see him off. Then Krishna persuaded them to return and continued back to his kingdom Dwarka with his companions. Now I'm going to tell you more about Dwarka in just a minute, and for those of you that like to know how to spell that, here is how it is written. You can read about it in you'll find all kinds of references to Dwarka even in Google. So in ancient times, this is how some artists have tried to depict what Dwarka looked like. And in present times, this is what it looks like. And this is the famous Dwarkadish temple, in which is housed the most beautiful deity of Krishna. But the original Dwarka, this is not it. The original Dwarka was an island. And that island has been found, buried deep in the ocean. These are some pictures of the remains that have been found from 5,000 years ago. Krishna blew his conch shell, announcing his arrival as he arrived into Dwarka, and the conch appeared to be reddened by the touch of his transcendental lips. It seemed that a white swan was playing in the stems of red lotus flowers. I love the imagery. That is Krishna coming in. I don't know if you all actually saw the pictures of Dwarka. Let me kind of go back to that again. I have a feeling they didn't show up on the screen. So I'm going to kind of show them to you all over again, just in case they didn't get seen. That was of old Dwarka. This is the present day Dwarkadish temple. The underwater scenes of Dwarka, as people have found it now. These are from excavations that have taken place. And these are other. Okay. On hearing the sound of Krishna's conch, that threatens fear personified, the residents of Dwarka came running to see him, to welcome him. The roads, markets, and public places were all thoroughly cleansed and moistened with scented water. The arches along the roads were decorated. Fruits, flowers, and seeds were scattered everywhere. Conch shells, bugles, and mantras were chanted. Yeah, this was the scene. And if we go a little closer, and even closer, it's Krishna arriving, being welcomed back into his kingdom in Dwarka. Many hundreds of well-known prostitutes rushed and eager to meet Krishna, their beautiful faces decorated with dazzling earrings which enhanced their beauty. Now, it's interesting. They actually had great respect and reverence for prostitutes. They were not judged. They were not thought of as evil people condemned in society. And no, they played a role. There were men who would stray, and there has always been the case. And for them, they played a role. Many were considered very wise. Many were shown to be incredibly wise and incredibly empowered women who did not choose to take the normal path. They were often wealthy. They were often very beautiful. And except for what happened with the Abrahamic religions that denounced this particular profession, we find that in the Vedic times it was not looked down on in that way. So, besides that, expert dramatists, artists, dancers, singers, historians, genealogists, and learned speakers all came to greet him. Krishna, the personification of Godhead, approached them and offered with due honor respect to each and every one of the friends, relatives, citizens, and all others who had come to receive and welcome him. He greeted everyone present by bowing his head, exchanging greetings, embracing, shaking hands, looking and smiling, giving assurances, and awarding benedictions even to the lowest person in rank. They said to him, "O Creator of the universe, you are our mother, our well-wisher, our Lord, Father, spiritual teacher, and worshipable deity. You are our Guru, our spiritual master, and by following in your footsteps, we have become successful in every respect. We pray, therefore, that you continue to bless us with your mercy." The residents of the heavenly planets rarely get to see you, but you have blessed us to look into your smiling face, which is full of affectionate glances, and see your transcendental form full of auspiciousness. So you can see how Krishna has reached out to each of them with so much of love, with every single person, and you can see that love being reciprocated. In the next line they say it even more beautifully. Whenever you go away, every moment of your absence seems like 1,000,000 years. At that time our eyes become useless, as if bereft of the sun. We cannot see your attractive face, whose smiles vanquish all sufferings. How can we exist without your presence? Tell me this. You've often heard different notions about God. People talk about God as the light. Would you prefer that, or would you prefer this vision of God? People talk of God as an old man sitting on the clouds in a throne. Would you prefer that vision or this? Because you can perceive God in whichever way you like. If you wish to perceive God simply as a stone or as an idol or as a nothing, or as nothingness, or you want to see yourself as God, okay, go for it. But here is a vision of God so sublime, so beautiful, so loving, so tender, so sweet, so delicious, that even the most hard-hearted of us will fall in love. And that's the whole point, to develop that love of God, to develop that sweet, tender relationship with God. That is why he comes here. That is why he reveals himself to us. That is why he shows us these lila, these pastimes. As Krishna passed along the public road of Dvaraka, his head was protected from the sunshine by a white umbrella. White feathered fans moved in semicircles, and showers of flowers fell upon the road. His yellow garments and gardens of flowers made it appear as if a dark cloud was surrounded simultaneously by the sun, the moon, lightning, and rainbows. Then he entered the palaces where his wives lived. I have a big shocker for you here. Krishna had 16,108 wives. Okay, 16,100 of them had been princesses who were kidnapped and locked away by an asura. Asuras are sort of demonic kind of beings his name was Bhaumasura. And Krishna had rescued them from the cave where he had locked them. And they begged him when they were released to marry them, because they said that nobody else will marry us. He has kidnapped us. People will think he's exploited us or whatever, and they will not marry us. In those times, things were pretty rigid about that. And so Krishna agreed to marry them, all of them, and he made for them a separate palace each, 16,100 palaces for each of those wives. And there were 8 other wives that he was married to earlier. Now you might say, oh, Krishna, he's such a womanizer. Oh my God, this is horrible. And there's a lot of people who have that kind of judgment, because back in his village in Vrindavan too, there were so many gopis who were in love with him. All the women of the town were in love with him. But so were all the men, and so were all the mothers, and so were all the fathers, and so were all the deer and the cows and everybody else. Why is he doing this? The fact of the matter is, if you don't understand Krishna as God, then certainly this is very confusing. But if you do understand Krishna as God, then it becomes a very different thing. You begin to see, oh, he has a loving relationship with everyone. And some people have aspired to become very intimate with him, to have that intimate, loving relationship with him. Some have longed, perhaps for many lifetimes, to be married to him. Others have sought to have a romantic love affair with him. With God, I mean, right? I mean, most people, again, we think of God in awe and reverence. God is great, we are small. Oh, I cannot say such sacrilegious things. But no, here we are being shown that you can have any kind of relationship you want with God. Anything, right? Do you want to be his friend? Do you want to be his lover? Do you want to be his wife? Or do you want to be his buddy? Right? Do you want to be God's parent? You don't just have to be his child. You can be whatever you want to be. What is the relationship you would like to have? You can have it. And that's the beauty of this. This sentiment, this feeling is even expressed by Sufis. Rumi and others talk about these kind of feelings. Many others who are on the path of bhakti or devotion for God express these feelings. Now you may say, well, God is male and all these are women. No. In the Vedic understanding, God is Purusha. Purusha means the enjoyer, and we are all Prakriti, that which is to be enjoyed by God. So in one sense, one could say God is male and all of us are female. Right? All of us, including the earth, including the planets, everything else is for his enjoyment. And so in that sense, Purusha and Prakriti, those concepts are there. Masculine and feminine are simply energies, are simply roles that we play, bodies that we come into as part of this existence on this earth. As such, both masculine and feminine energies exist in all of us. When you want to be the enjoyer of something, you are in your Purusha. When you are wanting to be enjoyed, then that you're in your feminine. So each of us has that quality in us, and each of us exhibits that. And so here we see it being played out fully in this way. In fact, Narad Muni, the great sage Narad, came to earth having heard of this. And there's a whole story in the Bhagavatam where he comes, and I'm just giving you a little preview of that, where he wants to see how is this possible? How is Krishna married to 16,108 queens? And he's heard they've got separate palaces. Then he comes to see what's going on out here. This is really bizarre. And what he sees is this. From his assembly where Krishna has been meeting with, as a ruler, he's been meeting with all these different people. He's got his, palace where he meets people. Then he comes back home. And then the one Krishna becomes 16,108 Krishnas, and each of them goes to each of the palaces. Then he says, okay, maybe these are clones he's made. Maybe there's something more to this. So he goes and starts looking inside. What's going on in these palaces? And he notices that in every palace he's doing something different. In one place he's sitting and eating. In another place he's sitting and he's playing with the kids. In another place he's making out with his wife. So in every place there is something different going on. So they're not clones. Not in the sense that they're all doing the same thing. Right? 16,108 different Krishnas. And we see the same thing happen during his Vrindavan Leela, when he is back in his village, in his childhood, where they're dancing, all the gopis are dancing with Krishna, and then Krishna becomes, as with each one of them thinks that Krishna is only dancing with me, right? And in fact, that makes them feel a little proud and a little arrogant, and then he disappears because, hey, they're getting a little too proud out here. So he goes away from the forest where they're dancing. But coming back to our story here, as Krishna's coming back in here, we see a scene out here where this is where Krishna had freed all the women, and he had accepted them as his wives. So now when he returned, their ecstasy was so strong that the queens who were shy first embraced him in the innermost recesses of their hearts. They embraced, there's a sort of shyness there. They embraced him visually and tried to restrain their feelings. They inadvertently shed tears. Although the queen's beautiful smiles and glances were exciting and could conquer Cupid himself by making him give up his bow in frustration, despite their attractiveness, they could not agitate Krishna's senses. Their simple and delicate women truly thought, and this is a really important point here, they thought that Krishna, their beloved husband, followed them. He did whatever they wanted, is what they thought, and was dominated by them. They were unaware of the extent of his glories, just as the atheists are unaware of him as the supreme controller of all that is. Now, if you have questions about all this, please write them down. I will take them up at the end. Definitely I will. I'm seeing the questions coming in, so please feel free to write. We now move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 12, the birth of Emperor Parikshit. And one more example, we're going to see one more example here in the case of Parikshit. So, back to Yudhishtira. Yudhishtira was the eldest of the Pandavas. Let's get that out of the way. Yeah. So Yudhisthira, King Yudhisthira, Emperor Yudhisthira, who had now become the ruler after the battle of Kurukshetra, he, it is said, administered generously to everyone. He was exactly like a father. He had no personal ambition and was freed from all selfishness and greed. Damn, I wish we had rulers like that, don't you? The opulence of the king was so enchanting that the celestial beings aspired for it. He was renowned for his big sacrifices and other things that he would do in honor of the divine. His queen, his stalwart brothers, his extensive land, his sovereignty over planet Earth, his fame, etc. But most of all, he was absorbed in the service of God, and nothing could satisfy him except bhakti. or devotional service to God. Now, that was Yudhisthira. Now, when Uttara's son, Parikshit, remember we talked about Uttara and how this Brahmastra was fired at her? Yeah, I think you'll remember that. The Brahmastra weapon was fired, it was like a nuclear weapon, and it was fired into the womb, it was fired at the womb of Uttara to kill her baby, who would have been the last descendant of their dynasty. And Krishna had gone and become, well, we're going to read about how he protected that baby. The baby's name is Parikshit. But how he got that name, let's find out. Okay, when Uttara's son Parikshit was in his mother's womb, suffering the burning heat of the Brahmastra, he observed Krishna coming as Vishnu to protect him. Vishnu was only a thumb high, that high, that's it. He had 4 hands, and a very beautiful blackish body, and he wore a dress of lightning yellow and a helmet of blazing gold. He wore earrings of molten gold, and his eyes were blood red with fury. His club constantly encircled him like a shooting star. He vanquished the Brahmastra, this nuclear weapon, just as the sun evaporates a dewdrop. This was the most powerful weapon known at the time, and it was done by mystical powers that a warrior would obtain. The unborn Parikshit watched him while in the womb, and then Vishnu disappeared. Another important part we learn here is this, that while in the womb, Parikshit is there. Before even this whole incident happened, he had heard so many things that his mother was reciting to him in the womb, and his spiritual growth had begun during that time. Here he was when Vishnu came to protect him. He was watching, and he witnessed that incident of Vishnu protecting him, and that became a very powerful seeking. It set up the seeking that he had to find Vishnu, to find God all over again during the course of his life. Then, when all the good signs of the zodiac were in place, Parikshit, the heir of the Pandavas, took birth. The king, Yudhishtira at that time, gave gold, land, villages, elephants, horses, and food grains in charity to the Brahmins. The Brahmins are the priests. The Brahmins blessed the child, Parikshit, and said that he was saved by Vishnu when he was doomed to be destroyed by an irresistible supernatural weapon. They said, he will be known as one who is protected by God. He will become a saintly king, a Rajarshi, and will be qualified with all good qualities. He will protect the citizens and be true to his word. So see these qualities that they are describing of a great king, of a truly empowered spiritual ruler. He will protect the citizens, be true to his word, be generous in charity. He will be as skilled an archer as his grandfather Arjun, will be as strong as a lion and as worthy a shelter as the Himalaya mountains. He will be forbearing like the earth, tolerant and equanimous as his grandfather Yudhisthira, munificent like Shiva, and the shelter of everyone like Narayan. They also predicted his death, how he would take shelter of Krishna and be trained in self-knowledge by the son of Vyas and ultimately renounce all material attachments. He would become famous in the world as Parikshit, the examiner, because he would come to examine all human beings in his search after that personality whom he saw before his birth. Thus he would come to constantly contemplate God. So with that, we come to the end of chapter 12 of the Bhagavatam. I wonder what your thoughts were. I wonder what you took away from that. There was a lot in here. Some of the thoughts I want to share with you of my own reading here is this, that we need a different era, a different time. Instead of megalomaniacs, power-hungry people, instead of people who are wanting power and fame, who want to be able to increase their wealth and their, fortune, people who are there to serve humanity, people who are there to help others. This is the need of our time. Although we've had some philosophies that tried to teach about equality for all humans and the welfare of everyone, unfortunately leaders, as you've seen, have taken advantage of that, and dictators took over some of that in the early attempts to do that. But we need a new time, a new era, and I hope that somehow the dark clouds of our times will pass, that we will come to a better place, that somehow our consciousness will change. And it all begins by hearing about these things. If you have no model, if you have no idea, if you have no ideal to look forward to, if all you have is the dregs of the earth, the one bad or incapable person followed by another, well then you can't even begin to imagine that there's another possibility. So I present all of this to you as another possibility. I hope that by many people contemplating this possibility, longing for this kind of rule, that we may somehow put forth the energy, the vibration required to be able to manifest such leaders into our world. It would be an incredible change of things. The earth might finally be able to settle down, but the way it looks right now, we're headed to some really dark times, and I do hope somehow there will be a turnaround to that. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the chat or in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Let me take a look at some of the questions over here, and then let's get into that. Cindy's been writing some really wonderful things here. So she says, okay, beautiful illustrations. How many years did the one in the womb live and serve and lead people back? Okay, so she's making a really important observation, a question here, and yes. And she says such leaders are needed. So how many years did Parikshit live? And the whole story of the Bhagavatam is about Parikshit. This person, Parikshit, who, I'll put up his name again over here so you can see it. Well, okay, let's move it up a little. Yeah, so Parikshit, the whole story in the Bhagavatam is going to revolve around Parikshit, because Parikshit is the one who, after this experience that he had, he began seeking. And something very devastating happened to him even later on in his life. He was cursed to die in 7 days. Now, and I'm letting out some additional stories of what is going to happen. But he was cursed to die in 7 days. And then knowing that, he could have counteracted the curse, but he decided, no, I want to know what is the purpose of life. I want to know what is the meaning of life. So he gathered together all the great saintly people, the mystics, the highly evolved beings, the rishis from all over the earth. He called for them to come and assemble. And then the leader of the most evolved of all of them, Shukadev, let me put his name up for you. Shukadev, he called him to speak and answer his questions. So Shukadev then, for 7 days, spoke on all kinds of topics. That 7 days of speaking, that is the Bhagavatam. That is what we are reading here. And so it covers a vast array of things. It will take us years to go through this. So I hope you're ready for that long journey. But it took them 7 days, non-stop, morning to night, without explanations, just go right through it. So yeah, that's how it happened. But thank you for asking, Cindy. I love your comment here as well. Yes, such leaders are definitely needed. Let's see if anyone else has had any questions. Would anyone like to come over on Zoom and ask questions? Let me see if I can switch over, get you here. Okay. And let's see. Okay, well, I guess I'm not got that set up properly. All right. Anyone else have any questions? All right. Well then, if you want to write it down, I can read your question and in the chat, and we can take it from there. If you would like to come and speak, you're welcome to. Shira, you got a question? Oh, wait a sec. I'm not hearing you. Hold on. Oh, 1 second. I know why. Yeah, there we go. Go ahead. Try that again.
Oh, I guess I'll comment that I'm here to be a leader, and there's going to be others. So
yes, that's what we need.
Anyone who wants to can be on that path.
Lovely.
Up for it.
Yeah, we don't have to be rulers, and we don't have to be emperors, and we don't have to have that kind of power, but we can be leaders in our own circle. Thank you for that, Shira. And thank you for the role you're playing in being able to help and guide others along the way. I think it's so valuable.
God bless you.
Thank you. And feel free to put it down on the chat as to what you're doing so that people can follow you if they want to. Yes, so each one of us, once you begin to realize these spiritual truths, the beauty is this, then you realize, okay, so what needs to happen here? A, I need to learn this stuff, I need to understand it, I need to live it, I need to apply it in my life. B, I need to share it with others, I need to lead by example. I need to guide and share this wisdom or any other wisdom you've gained, whatever you have been blessed with, share that with others. And I know that you're doing that, Shira. I see that Swati does that. I see many of you do that. And thank you so much for the work you do. It really means a lot. Yes, we're all looking. Thank you, Cindy, for the things you're saying. Looking forward to the rest of the story. We are too. So yes, the story, the philosophies, all of these are, and some of them are histories that go back thousands of years, like way before that period even. They'll go back to like other eras, times that go back maybe tens and 20s of thousands of years. I don't know, hundreds of thousands of years maybe. Or maybe they're from other planets. I really don't know. But they're all powerful lessons for us to learn, and that's what matters. So, with that, I'll say good night. Thank you very much. Jai Shri Krishna. Hare Krishna. I'll see you next week.